funky music.
Alright, welcome back. We are now going to dive into a series of a few tutorials to discuss how to create tunnels of this sort. Kind of a space scene with something that looks like some broken walls inside a tunnel, some 3D aspect to it, or at least it looks like a little bit of some embossing, some shadow drops, and different layers of it too. They're not really layers per se, but it looks like we have some things moving faster close up, and we'll give them a little bit of a reddish tint. And that's a trick we can play on the eye to make it look like it's closer, and then a bluish tint for things that are farther away or on the outer shell. You see the ones moving slower also. And then there is some sort of a starry sky background. Now this one has a blurry nature to it, some zoom blur. We might do something a little bit different, perhaps create some of these assets with the Starry Night filter, something like this with the neutron filter. When we combine that into the other animation, it might typically get you something like this. And so I wanted to show you some of the possibilities that we can work on, even doing some animated kaleidoscopes like this one here. And that may be perhaps one of the last of the series. We'll definitely focus on how to create some bits and pieces that look a little bit like nerdy, techno rocks surfaces. We need some different bits and pieces. We need to build some assets like these that rotate, maybe different colors, and that rotate in different directions, or they don't rotate. So we will go through different steps like this one here, how to turn this. See, this one is a tunnel that's opaque, it's solid, but we want to have some areas, broken windows, or some holes chosen to let us see through and see the background skies behind it. So it's this one here where we see there are some fully black areas, and we can then color code on that, or color key. I don't know if I have one with a starry field. This one here is just turning. We don't have, that one is not composed with the starry field yet, but we do have other things we can put in the background. It could be some sort of a mystic dark grid, something like this. And of course also starry skies. Let's see here, some starry skies where we're kind of flying into it, warp speed mode. Here is with a little bit of a motion blur or a zoom blur added to that, make it slow. So a lot of different assets basically for video backgrounds or video backdrops that we want to put together. Alright, so let's get started. Well, let's build one first, and in fact let's have a look at this image as a starting point. Right, this is kind of the crucial thing, is well, how do we create some of these assets, like something like this here. How do we create this kind of surface with a seemingly random set of organized or disorganized blotches or squares and rectangles of different brightness. And one way to do that is to start from something like this. So I'm going to copy that into the clipboard, and then just Control V to paste it right in here. And I would like to replace the image. So I have this image in Dogwaffle as a 512 by 512. Let's go to image info to double check that. Yep, 512 by 512 pixels. And I'm going to store this because I'm sure to use this one again. First thing, maybe we'll want to see how did we create this image in the first place. So one thing that I would recommend is you grab you start with a blank image, and then you use perhaps the rectangle tool. Let's say this one here. Now there's two parts to the rectangle tool. There's the upper left half of it, and that one will draw a outline rectangle. So that's not the one we want. I mean, you could change the color, but it's using the current brush, in this case sort of the default airbrush. It's using the current brush to draw that outline of the rectangle. What we want instead is the filled part. So click on the lower right half of that same icon to select the rectangle fill mode, and then you have the ability to do that. Okay, so that's a starting point. Now we need to have perhaps a color that's kind of in the teal area, something like this, although it doesn't really matter because we'll also turn it into grayscale at some point. But what we want to do is work on the opacity a little bit. So now this is the opacity of the brush. We need the opacity on the fill mode right here, right? So that's the one where we want to reduce it, maybe to about 30 or 40. So it's only a very little bit of opacity, but every time we add another one, it will keep making darker parts as well. So with that, you can easily create maybe one big rectangle in the middle, and it doesn't have to be perfectly square, right? And then do a couple of oddities, I call them, a couple of odd elements, maybe a couple of long ones like this. You know, do a couple of them in parallel, and again, it doesn't have to be perfect. And in fact, the more it looks like it's man-made, the better. And so there will be some design errors, right? As imperfect as we are. And so we have something like this. If you think about it, if you were to use this as an elevation map, this would look really interesting because we have kind of city blocks of different elevations or depths. Now, if we invert it, because we started from a bright area, if we invert it, it will be darker all around it, and that's what we see right here. So that's a starting point. We can perhaps expand the dynamic range a little bit, expand the dynamic range there. Let's go turn this into a grayscale. Click on image again and select grayscale, and you can use perhaps the expose through a lens to see how, you know, how much of grayscale and brightness you want there. And you can still re-expand dynamic range. So you know you have some black pixels where the darkest areas are, and some white pixels where the brightest areas are. So now let's store this one here. This is an important asset. You may want to save that to file. So now the next thing is to see, well, what happens when we turn this into puppy ray, just to get a little bit of a 3D appearance on that. So I'm going to go to transform puppy ray. I'm going to use the GPU version, that's a little bit faster, and enable the global illumination, enable or reduce the pre-filter, and you know, that's where you get a good starting point, get an idea of what that thing looks like in terms of a 3D. Perhaps reduce the interpolation there, so we get nice crisp edges, and we can look around perhaps this way or that way, just to get a little bit of a better idea of what that structure looks like. Now, you don't need to have it elevated like that high. You know, increase the quality a little bit to see it for what it's really going to be on final render. And but perhaps you want it flatter, just to get a little bit of like a, you know, metallic surface with a couple of structures on it, but not big structures, not so high elevation. So what you want to do is click on more in order to see more details here, and then reduce the scale. Perhaps reduce the quality here so it's a little bit more interactive, and then reduce the scale until it's almost gone. There you go, and then re-render it maybe with the final render at this point. And so you get an idea of what that surface will look like with a little bit of shading or lighting on it. Alright, let's go back to that image now and see other tools that we will actually want to use. One is a filter for embossing, right? When we use the color emboss, the gray emboss, not so much. Let's use the color emboss. Convolve color emboss. That one will add a little bit of a 3D shading appearance as well. So that's an interesting one to keep in mind. There's another one that's in the stylize area and the lighting tool. So the lighting tool has a light source that you can give some brightness to, the intensity. You can bring it farther away from the surface or closer right on the surface. And you can also move it around. So as you move it around, it will start casting shadows to the other direction here. And you can change the texture height so that the shadows look a little bit more pronounced. You can also change the color, change the light color perhaps to a sort of a yellowish or orange. And again, if you bring the light down, it's going to have the shadows a little bit longer. You can sometimes, I guess, you can go all the way down below the surface even. It depends a bit on what the gray values are that you have in the image. One thing you can also do is adjust, multiply the original to the original, so you still see some of the original colors, or it's going to blur away a little bit. And the smoothness, if you want to see more of a bigger features and lose some of the fine detail. So there's plenty to experiment with here, and really the idea is to see that you can do that. We will use this tool probably once we have the tunnel. So let's now actually talk about the tunnel. And I'm going to go back to this one because this one looks a little bit better. One thing I did actually is I picked this up as a custom brush so I could a little bit faster paint a few more of these. So one thing you could do, for instance, is use the magic wand here to select all the black area, and you see the marching ants around it. And in fact, if you highlight it with overlay alpha, it shows in pink what is not selected. Now what you do is you invert the selection. All right, invert alpha. So now you have selected the inner side. Okay, and then that you can pick up as a custom brush. From the brush menu, you select it as brush. So now I have a custom brush. I can preview it, PRV here, so I see it there with a little bit of transparency because the opacity by default is about halfway for a new custom brush. There it is. Now it's fully opaque and fully transparent on the outside of it. And I can store this brush to work with it perhaps in the future. Film strip shows there's only one image in there. And what I'll do is make it a little bit smaller. There you go, something like this. And now I'll clear this image. In fact, I'll clear it to black. Right-click that erase button here to clear to black. And I'll start painting this thing. Now, I don't want to paint it fully opaque like this. So let's go, and you know what? I might need to erase to black often again. So I'm going to store this image. Just plain black. Store this image. There you go. And while we add it, you never know, you might need a plain white. So erase to white and store that image. That's a very easy and convenient way to say, okay, I've done some work. I want to go start back from scratch. And how do I do that? One click. Click on black. Boom. The whole image goes back right in there. Or click on white. Click on this one. Whatever you have stored here, you can very easily restore. Now, there's other things you can restore, maybe just a particular portion of that. Let's say here you could say RGB channels, add the red. So now you have just red added to that, the red channel. All right, so let's start with this and give it a lot of transparency, meaning reduce the opacity. And if you go down to really very little, you barely see it here in the preview, and you're going to have to go a few times before you start seeing this. That's adding a lot of additional detail, because each time I click here or drag around, or maybe you'll do that with the higher step distance, so you have to move the mouse a little bit more. Let's give the opacity a break here a little bit more so we can see it. But you now basically very quickly can plaster that thing all over and have a lot of detail. You get to see that detail a bit better if, again, you go to expand the dynamic range, and now you see all the damage I've done. So there's a lot more fine detail now on that we didn't have in the original image here, right? So that's the image I want to use, and I will store that image. And again, if you don't trust your PC not crashing, or if you're low on battery power or something, if you're running out of memory or soon enough, it's a good idea to save this to file. It's a good idea also to check every once in a while, well, how much memory are you actually using? Right, so if you look at the performance on your system, are you pushing the memory? If you look at the size of the processes, like here's Dogwaffle, are you looking at something that's about to run out of memory? Like you see here, memory, I only have 164 megabytes of RAM being used right now, so that's good. I'm not pushing into the 1 or 2 gigabytes yet, so not to worry. All right, so quick last check on this one. If I render that, again with the puppy ray, just to get an idea of what I've just done here, an endless texture that can be tiled and seamlessly seen going in some different directions, maybe with a little bit more of the specularity. If I increase that intensity and reduce the hardness, you'll get a bit more of a metallic look to that. Let's say if we put a comma in front of it here, you get a nice metallic look or appearance. Maybe we can reduce the intensity. There you go. So I mean, that's some of the things you can do to make it a nice, interesting texture just by itself, and then give it a 3D elevated appearance with Puppy Ray, the ray tracer. But that's not what we're doing here. So we're going now to turn this into a tunnel. So the thing to do is, first of all, the tunnel will be animated, and it's going to be in the animated category. So you look under the filter, animated, and you'll see the tunnel right there. Before we can actually use that, we need to have a placeholder for the animation though. Okay, so what we need to do is turn this image into an animation. Let me turn the preview off for the brush. We don't need that anymore. And now let's go to the animation and create. And let's create a short one first, just 99 frames, or even shorter. Let's try 60. Yeah, 60 frames. And go with that. And so at this point, we have a copy 60 times of that same image along the animation. Right. So here's nothing really moving yet. But we can use that tunnel filter now. And now here's where I really want to emphasize a new feature in Dogwaffle 9.2. It's the ability to store things beyond just the image. Remember, we have been able, and we have actually stored, we used this command a few times now to store the image copy. That's really nice for your workflow. Same with the brush. We stored that brush. And we could also have stored the selection mask. Let's say, for instance, if I restore this one with the alpha, right? If I go and paste the image in the center there, if I had this one and I show the alpha, that also gets restored, alpha on. No, actually this one did not. I guess it has it, but we need to say something that you want it. Somewhere there, use this brush with alpha, replace alpha, there it is. No, doesn't have it, that's weird. I thought, oh, maybe I copied that differently. But you have the ability to restore the alpha as well. Let me see if I can replace alpha. That's not it. Use image grayscale as alpha. Well, that will do something similar. Not exactly what I meant to do, but I just wanted to show you an example. Okay, if we have the alpha, well, how did we do that? Oh, we just used the magic wand here. Let's go with the magic wand there. So here's the alpha, and we wanted to store that, right? Can you do that? Well, sure enough. Or let's say we want to store the inverted alpha. Well, here is what you do. You go to the selection, you invert alpha. So remember, that's what we had, the selection of the inside. And now we can store alpha. We've done this for a long time. You can store a copy of the alpha channel. You can store a copy of the image of the in the brush and its parameters and modify them. And you can store the image and the alpha channel with it. So all of these things have been around for a while. Well, now there is this new feature in 9.2 where you can also store the animation. All right, so let me do this. Let me clear the image here. Let me go back to the original. There it is. So here's the animation, and I want to store that. Now, granted, it doesn't have much yet to animate. It doesn't show any movement, but I still want to have this sequence of 60 frames in a placeholder stored away for quick reuse. That's what you do. Click on animation, store animation, and you have a choice here. You can have it in memory. If it's a short clip like this, make it fast. Boom, done already. And I'm actually using a version that's already beyond 9.2, where we have a few more additional options to immediately use that animation as a animated swap image or as an animated selection. So you don't have that quite yet. But what you do have is the ability here to use it as an animated brush. Actually, of that, I'm not really sure yet either. But you do have the ability to restore the animation, that's for sure. So what you'll see is the ability to use that to store the animation and then quickly get back to it. Why would you do that? Well, for instance, if you paint over that, right? If you mess it up and you do that in many frames, and I mean really have damage done, that becomes impossible or very difficult to restore with undo and other things, right? Or you've applied some filters to that. Let's say you say I'm gonna go and apply the stylized lighting tool, make it bright, make it go from here on the light, and do all that stuff, and then gradually realize, oh no, that's not what I wanted, let's undo. And here's the animate across the entire sequence. So we've applied that to the entire image sequence, and there's lots of noise. It's no use, and we have to go back to the original. Normally, or in the past, what you would do is hope you saved it in the file in the first place, and go back to loading like an AVI file, right? Or if you saved it as an image sequence, or if you stored it here, you can save it as a DWA, Dogwaffle animation. That's good, but and that's fairly fast. But it's still 1 or 2 clicks that you'd rather not have to spend if you're in a hurry, or if if like me you're lazy and you don't want to click more than is necessary. Well, when you have stored this image here, all you do is 1 click, boom. Well, okay, 2. You need to confirm that you want that. And there it is. So you have a restore that's really fast. Now, if the animation is really big, it's not going to fit in memory. Again, since it's already in Dogwaffle, and it may have exhausted the memory. So one thing I recommend is to go to actually save it to disk. That's going to be a little bit faster, more usable. It's very fast as well. You saw it didn't take any time to save. If it's a very long animation, you may wait a second or 2. But it's still faster probably than if you have to save it to a file through the interaction, with selecting your folder and your file and your compressors or codecs and all that stuff. It's going to be faster to just work with this. The real beauty of it now is that you can do stuff, work with it, do some changes, keyframe things, and if you're not happy with it, in 1 or 2 clicks you're back to the drawing board. You can do things like, let's say you're doing a snowfall on top of it here, and you render that. And then you say, oh, I forgot to, do something like change the color, change the parameters. That's what I wanted, but now it still has the other one. Just click here, restore it, apply, and you're done. Right? So that's the beauty of that storing a DWA, storing the current animation, is that it's a tremendous gain in your workflow. It's going to go make things much faster. And so we're almost done for time on this tutorial. What I'll do is I'll get you started on exactly using that tool here to restore the animation. And see, we don't need this mask anymore. We probably don't need this brush anymore. Might still need this, and definitely will need this. This one, I don't know. Let's keep these around too. All right, so what I'd like to do is to put this one into a tunnel, right? So let's go to filter, animated, and tunnel. All right, now let's use the defaults first. All right. And this works best, by the way, if it's a 512 by 512 image, like I have in this case, 512 by 512. Make it a squared image. If you have different dimensions, keep it squared. Otherwise, you'll see some side effects. It's not working that well. The algorithm is really designed for about that dimension and that aspect ratio. All right, so but let's click on go, and a couple of renderings later, you'll now have that tunnel. All right, you can play it. And you say, oh yeah, that's cool, but I didn't want it to rotate it yet. I just wanted to fly into it without that spinning motion. What do? Click, done, restore. Okay, so let's do that now again without. See how quick that was? This is really the beauty of having that stored animation available to quickly restore it and say, okay, this time I want to shift along the x-axis. It's actually along towards me. That's what that does. And then here I'll change the rotation to 0 and see if that does it. Yep, that seems to be the trick. So now I have this animation. Now you'll see the jump at the end of the animation. It's not looping or loopable by default. You can though make it into a loopable animation if you want to. That's right click here and you see make loopable. I'm not going to do that quite yet though, because one thing I wanted to do is show you how you can make some parts of this turn dark, black for instance, so we can then later color key to that to overlay another thing like a transparent background that we can see through it. So we need to now use the tools that allow us to perhaps change the contrast, change the brightness, or do some cutoff at some particular darkness level. So I'll do that with the timeline. That's not the only way to do it, but certainly a convenient way. And before I do any changes, let's store this animation, because that's now the one we're going to use a lot. So let's go store animation to disk, and there it is. That's our working copy now. This one we could dismiss, but let's not be too cocky here. Let's assume we might make mistakes and have to go back to it. And so what I'll do is keep this one, and let's go to the color adjust. Perhaps we want to do the color adjustment a little bit and reduce the red so we get a little bit of a bluish tint or a teal, something like that, right? Apply that. And next step, of course, is to store that one, right? Store to disk, there you go. Now, every time you store, it's going to disk. It's not taking a lot of memory. And no, that's why I want you to use the Control-Alt-Delete or Control-Alt-Escape key to see how much memory does this use. I'm at 400 megabytes right now. So still very good, plenty. I have 16 gigabytes of RAM here, but this program is a 32-bit application, so the limit you're watching for is about 2 gigs. You don't want to go over 2 gigs. 2.5 or so is where it's going to start having trouble. So what you want to do is keep an eye on that. That's not a bad idea. Let's keep it there somewhere. Make this a small one. There's Dogwaffle. And adjust it so we can see how much RAM are we using, right? Maybe something like this. There. So we're looking at this number, 400 MO, that's megabytes in French, mégaoctet. And we'll just keep that down here somewhere so we can keep an eye on it. If necessary. So one thing that I'll do is, no, not there. All right. You know what? Let me just minimize it for now. All right. So we have this animation right now, and we need to find now the dark parts. So let's use this filter, and talking about the value adjustment or the hue saturation value. Some of these are the threshold, not so much the threshold. That's going to give us a black or white, nothing else. So the value adjustment, that one we have some nice contrast and some other things we can adjust here. And if you go like this, you'll easily find a way to make some of the bright parts remain bright and some of the dark parts go totally dark. So you can adjust to keep a nice mix of half of it gone and half of it still there. Right? The idea is to see, well, how much do you want gone? If you have like this, you'll see much more of the background skies behind it when you stage it together. And if you go like this, you'll only have a few spare, like a couple of broken walls or holes in there. So we'll experiment with those in time. So right now we'll go about this much and apply that. All right, so let's play this slowly. And now what we'll do is we'll store this animation. Okay, so we'll keep this one. Again, animation, store, store animation to disk. All right. So that's one, and now we want another one that's going to go at a different color and slower or faster. So let's first of all give it a little bit more holes. Let's adjust this to have very little of the. Oh, you know what? Let's actually do another one altogether. Let's start this one again, and this one is doing like this, or even this, start from scratch. That's why it's nice to have all of these around still. So we can go and adjust, generate a tunnel again. Let's go to animated tunnel. There it is. And this time we'll give it a little bit of a spin, but also we'll give it much less of the movement, the forward movement. So let's go slowly on that and a little bit of rotation. All right, okay, that. So that way it looks different, and it will really look interesting when we combine it with the one we already have created. All right, so this one here we will need to adjust a little bit of the contrast as well. So we'll perhaps saturate it a little bit more, give it a bit more contrast, darkness, something like this. Not too much there. Let's apply that. Okay. And perhaps do a dynamic range expansion, and then go store that one. So we have, actually we need that one a little bit reddish tint. Why not? Let's give it, go back to color adjustment and reduce the blue and the green so we get a bit more of the reddish tint. Perhaps a little bit of that. Okay, apply that. So we have a slightly different color on that. And so now all we've got to do is store that so we don't lose it. Store the disk. All right, so we've got these two elements, this one here and this one here, and we're going to use one as a animated swap image. All right, remember we have the swap buffer, or the swap image, we can toggle back and forth from one to the other. Well, this one here right now is a plain yellow, but we can make it actually that it's using one of these animations. We can, or one that we store on file. So I would go and save that to file perhaps as an AVI. Let's see which one are we going to use. This one here is going to be in the background. This one's going to be in the foreground. So let's use this one here. Let's save that one to file. Let's go and restore it and then save it as an AVI. In fact, we might want to do a little bit more darkness here. So let's go to the value contrast again and perhaps increase a little bit. There you go. Not too much. There you go. Let's do that and save that one to AVI or to DWA. Right. The nice thing with AVI is that you can see it in Windows Explorer. So you can see the thumbnail. So let's go save it to AVI. Let's make sure it's playing at 30 frames a second when you play it back. Let's make sure we indicate where to save it is on our project folder. There it is. Daily Dose, Potpourri, I think is where I went with that. There it is, and I have plenty there already. So I'm going to call this one something like Tunnel 9. Tunnel 9 for the tutorial. Toot. There you go. And of course we will need to indicate what codec to use when we actually save that. And I'm going to go with my favorite Lagerif lossless codec because it's fast, small files, and it still is lossless. Alright. Always verify that it plays nice when you play it back. Yep, there it is. Alright, so we have that one. And we can now, because it's on file, we can go and point at it for our animated swap image. We can go to the animation menu, animated swap image, point to or open that AVI file we just saved. And so where is it? Tunnel 9. Toot, there it is. Right? And select it. Open that. So, and we select the whole thing, the whole range of images. So that entire image sequence or that frame sequence of the animation is now not only still here in the front, we can now replace, we can go back to this one now. Alright? So we have this one in the foreground, but we have the swap image that we can see at the same time if we combine this and we right click here to show the layer mode, maybe screen mode. We can now see both together at the same time. Alright, that's where the magic is starting. It looks like two layers now basically. We have a layer of the front main image and we have a layer of the animated swap image. And you can combine these in different ways, just not in opaque mode. But that's okay. We'll do that opaque selection through a different way. Let's see, around tracing screen. I mean, there's so many different modes to explore. But what we'll do is we'll use the timeline now to key on black, right? So that anything that's black here will become transparent. And that's going to be good enough. I mean, that's going to be a good way to blend the two together. Right, so simply click on the filter inside the timeline and find there's a whole group here that says combine with swap. That's a good starting point just to understand how you can blend from one to the other as well, you know. And you could do a transition with that. You could do an animation where it transitions from here, keyframe, and then go to there, keyframe to that value, and you have something in between, right? Now this one's a spline interpolation. Click here to make it just a plain straight linear interpolation. But and then maybe you want to hold it a little bit so it's actually staying for a while before it's doing that transition. So you can grab these control markers there, and so you have a nice, interesting effect here. Apply that, and this is what I just created now. Look at that. See how it's blending from one to the other. Alright, so that's a little gimmick we can use too at times. I'm going to click undo here now and switch to a different filter. Instead of the combine, where we combine them by luminance or brightness or other things, I'm going to use the composite with swap. And I don't have a green screen in this one or a blue screen, so I'm going to use the color key. And with the color key, you simply select which color you want to consider transparent. So if I pick the pink here, that's where you'll see the image underneath it. Now that's not what I want because everything is black here. I need it actually here. That's what I want. Now I have the pink in the front remaining visible, but I have the blue in the background starting to show as well. And that's exactly where I want it to be. Alright, so let's apply that. And that pretty much completes the animation that I wanted to do in this first tutorial. We'll take a close look at some of the different steps here again. And we'll see some longer examples because, you know, at some point you'll start with this and then there's so much more you can do.
Funky music. Funky music.